en heren, die uitslag met 2 streke uitstaande dui op hierdie stadium op 'n 68% ja-stem en 'n 32% nee.
As far as the political crisis is concerned, the first fact there is that there's presently a lack of legitimacy of the political system. There's also a widespread mistrust of the security forces and the system of justice. There's a climate of repression and intolerance, and there's escalating exploitation of ethnic and regional divisions. And there's also a collapse of local authorities and the whole system of local government. During the past almost 2 decades, we have been experiencing economic and political instability in South Africa. Now, this economic and political instability and uncertainty led to low and declining levels of investment. Technology has moved against South Africa. The world economy has slowed down, so the demand for our exports have gone down. The process of import substitution has reached its peak. South Africa experienced fairly rapid economic growth from about 1946 to 1974, on average almost 5% per year. Since then, the growth rate has declined dramatically and has fallen away. In the last 2 to 3 years, we haven't had any economic growth. In fact, the gross domestic product has been declining. You can clearly see the relationship between the growth performance and the investment performance in the economy since the Second World War. The declining growth rate has also meant that there hasn't been sufficient job creation. In fact, there has been no net job creation in the formal sector of the economy during the past 10 years. And with new entrance to the job market at a rate of about 400,000 per year, this has meant that unemployment has increased significantly.
In addition to this, there is a rapid increase in urbanization caused, amongst other things, by the failed Bantustan policy, the migrant labor system, and more recently, the drought. At the same time, there is a general collapse in the rural community as remittances from migrant workers decline and services are cut back. As a result of these things, the whole social fabric in both urban and rural areas is gradually disintegrating, while the population is on the increase. Educational and health services are severely strained, and some are not working at all. Social indicators show that life expectancy, infant mortality, and literacy are comparable to some of the poorest countries in Africa. There is a highly unequal distribution of wealth. And when we look at the crisis as a whole and possible ways of addressing it, we must take this fact into account. Consequently, the country is caught in a vicious circle of political instability, economic crisis, and social disintegration. The team argues that if the trends of the past 10 to 15 years cannot be reversed, all these problems are likely to become insoluble by the end of the decade.
In the ostrich scenario, there is a standoff in negotiations. After the referendum, the government perceives the international community to be tolerant of its positions. It therefore becomes inflexible. On the other hand, the international community perceives the demands and the positions of the liberation movement as being too radical. But the liberation movement maintains its bottom line. This leads to a breakdown in negotiations, And the government, perceiving this tolerant international climate, then decides to get together all of its allies and those who believe in the federal option, and they decide to go it alone. The result is a non-representative government over the period we're looking at, which does not address the crisis that we have identified, and the crisis deepens. As it deepens, resistance to this non-representative government increases, leading to repression. Under these conditions, there is no business confidence and therefore no economic growth. The crisis deepens and the government is either forced to go back to negotiations or simply collapses.
The ostrich scenario fails to meet the three critical needs: a political settlement, a new growth path, and social reconstruction.
In the lame duck scenario, the holders of power, current holders of power, recognize that they have to extend the vote to the disenfranchised. But they fear irresponsible government. Now, several credible parties representing people who don't have the vote come to the conclusion that they need to compromise lest minority government continues. They compromise, an agreement is reached. There's a prolonged period between 8 and 10 years of transitional type government. There are sunset clauses. There's provision for minority vetoes. But the government that comes to being in this manner has limited credibility, limited legitimacy, and there's a lot of uncertainty about the future direction. In this scenario, because of the uncertainty, because of vacillation, local and foreign investors hold back. There isn't a clear growth strategy, and because of that, the growth rates don't exceed anything between 1% and 3%. Unemployment increases by another 3 to 4 million people during the 10-year period that we're looking at. The housing crisis isn't solved. The education and health crisis gets worse. And by the end of this period, an arrangement that was supposed to satisfy all really leaves nobody happy. The economic, political, and social crisis actually worsens.
In the Icarios scenario, the settlement is already been reached and the new government is elected popularly on the basis of that agreement and the final democratic settlement. However, because of the huge backlog of social and economic disparities,